You're listening to Achtung Millwall, broadcasting from the beautiful South Birmingham. Accept no substitute.
Hello and welcome, dear listeners. It's that time of the month again with the Rowett train rolling. And I'm rolling on to Reading, in actual fact, this coming Saturday. It is time for Neil Fissler and I to review the fixtures ahead for the month of March. And mentioned the name already, here he is himself, Mr. Neil Fissler. How are you doing, Neil?
Not too bad, Nick. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to my football for a change as we've had some good results lately. 4 on the spin now, 4 wins on the spin. And we're rolling off to the Majeski Stadium on Saturday, and a bit of a buzz going on. I don't know how long it will last for, Neil, but it's nice to be enjoying your football again for a change.
Yeah, that's right. I think I sent you a message last week that I had a good feeling about the weekend's game. And
You
that
did,
lasted all
Mystic
of about
Fissler.
30 seconds.
That's right.
And that all lasted about 30 seconds until Mason Bennett went off. And but no, it's just great to be that you got a smile on your face after watching Millwall for a change, haven't you? And
it's what
we're overcoming adversity. We're doing what we do best, aren't we? Well, we haven't got any players, so we've gone on a 4-match unbeaten run.
Do you know what? I think you're right, and I think this is one thing I hope that comes through these shows, listeners, is over Mill history. I think it's often the case that when our backs are to the wall and our choices are very limited, as they are increasingly with injuries at the moment, but I do think we respond to that in a way that we just don't seem psychologically capable of being the favourites or having a wealth of options at our disposal. We seem to need to be up against it, and somehow it brings out the Mill fighting spirit, Neil.
Yeah, definitely. It's what we're about, isn't it? Well, we are the underdog. We are the unpopular choice. Nobody supports Millwall through choice or through any other option, I guess. And it's just the Millwall way. It's been that way throughout our entire history, isn't it? So we just revel in it.
That's very true. Very true. So we're going to be looking at our fixtures for the month of March, as we've said already, listeners, but looking at it through the prism of fixtures from the past to try and delve into the highways and byways of Mill history. Now, I mentioned already, we've got Reading away coming Saturday. Shall I begin with my choice on this one, Neil? And then we'll flip over.
Yeah, well, I do remember your game. As I was there.
Yeah, I was there. And I'm the one I've chosen, listeners, because I think a lot of us were there. In fact, there were 3,112 of us there. It was Millwall. Reading 3, Millwall 4 played on the 6th of January 2001. And I fell upon this one, Neil, in the list of historical fixtures because it's just one of those. It's unbelievable. It's 21 years ago. And that's the first thing that really struck me, how time flies, because it seems, and the names in the team sheet just seem like yesterday. And I think maybe... I don't know. Time is a cruel mistress, isn't it? But, it does seem like very, very recent. And yet it is 21 years since we went to Reading that day and won 4-3. And I'll never forget we went 4-0 up. Goals from Neil Harris. In fact, a hat-trick from Neil Harris. 17th minute goal. Penalty on 22. Ricky Newman, own goal. He's playing for Reading that day. And then a 50th minute fourth from Neil Harris. And, of course, we took our foot off the gas somewhere. They staged the comeback, didn't they?
In true Millwall fashion, 4-0 up and nearly contrived to fuck it up, didn't we?
I think the too many were thinking about which restaurant they were going to go to and then the pub afterwards after the game, weren't they? So it finished 3-4 from 4-0 up on the 50th minute, and in fact to the 65th minute was the first goal by a name that I've picked out. Sammy Igo, who's playing for Reading that day, would actually come back and play for Millwall in 2008. I just want to read out, if I may, Neil, the Mill team. It's a classic side, and we've covered a lot of these players a lot in the past, but it's always worth reading out the Mill 11 that day. Tony Warner in goal, Matt Lawrence, Joe Dolan. Obviously would lose his career to injury, Joe Dolan, but a great defender, Neil. Big Joe in defence, alongside Sean Dyche, who is a player that I've picked out because obviously he's gone on to fame and fortune as Burnley manager, but a very reliable and very solid Millwall defender in our promotion-winning season. Robbie Ryan famously would play his last game for us as a cup final up against Cristiano Ronaldo before leaving, I think, to go to Bristol Rovers, if memory serves.
They went to Bristol Rovers for a
Bristol.
season, didn't they?
Then we've got a midfield as it's listed here. Paul Ifill, great player, loved Iffy. Christophe Kiné with his floppy hair and his Belgian flamboyant skills. David Livermore used to take some stick, Neil, didn't he? Livers used to get a lot of stick. I never thought he was as bad as he took.
I can't remember who actually took more stick, David Livermore or Liam Trotter.
Two decent players.
Similar type of player, wasn't it? But every pass, I remember every pass Livermore made, a groan went up, and I never quite understood why. Very solid player, just wasn't spectacular, was he? Well, in many ways, he's an archetypal Millwall player. He just gave you 100%.
Absolutely, he was a white Jimmy Hebdo, wasn't he? He was.
Yeah.
But for some reason, for reasons that beat us, he was the boo boy, and actually,
I think every side has one. Every side has one, and David Livermore was that side.
Yeah, and then also midfield stroke attacking forward, Tim Cahill, classic player. This would be Cahill in his pomp, and then in the front two of Neil Harris and Paul Moody, a front two that I love, Neil. This was a wonderful season, wasn't it? 2000, 2001, third division championships season.
Yeah. Well, I know we go on about the Posses and the Wellers, that team from 50 years ago. But this one has to be up there as one of Millwall's greatest sides or greatest squads, doesn't it?
I believe so.
That season was just cheer up Mark McGee, wasn't it?
Yes, that would be the regular the monkeys, wouldn't it? Cheer up, Sleepy Jean.
Yeah, and it just seemed that everything that happened that season, whatever happened, we'd just come back and we'd win games when we shouldn't have done, and we play teams off the park, and it was just a great time, wasn't it? I think it was the first full season I took my son to games.
Yeah.
It was just a fantastic side. The Giorgio shirts, nobody had heard of this.
And the yellow, we're playing in a yellow kind of quite almost gold away kit with dark blue stripes down the sides. Giorgio sponsored, which was some dodgy Theo G brand of jeans or something sold off of the racks outside Whitechapel Station.
Yeah, well, Strike Force made the kits and nobody had heard of them, but they had quite a fit bird in the programme on the advert. I remember that, and mate, it was just one of those times in Millwall's history. I've spoken to a lot of players from this squad, including Joe.
Yeah,
and it's just a great time. Harris at his pomp.
Absolutely.
What would Harris have done if fate hadn't have intervened that summer?
Yeah, it's
Tim Cahill.
Cahill and his well, look at the substitute there, Neil. I mean, I've mentioned the starting 11. That was Christophe Kiné was replaced with Stephen Reid in the 71st minute. What a substitution! Stephen Reid comes in for Christophe Kiné. Because obviously we're 4-0 up. He
wasn't the bravest, was he? But
no, he could do it though. I liked Christophe. Yeah, I liked him. I think I've probably got a soft spot for flamboyant continental ball players, and he was one of the. We haven't had many of those in our Mill as a club. Probably tends not to go for that kind of player, but when we do get them, wonderful days. Just a really enjoyable time. It's like a golden year in a way, that 2000-2001 season, Neil. It's reminds me a lot of 1988, games that almost exist in their own time bubble in your head, really. Wonderful win. We made heavy weather of it. We managed to let Reading back to 3-4 from 4-0 down. And I've mentioned Sammy Aiko just because he scored for them to begin that that kind of rush back, and I don't know why, but we'll probably never mention Sammy Igo in other circumstances. So I picked him out of the wonderful Mill Who's Who book, which is on victorpublishing.co.uk, 1999. I just had a look before I started recording with Neil, and I thought I'd lift
told you how much my own book costs.
It sounds less crass if someone else does it, Fissler. Bit of class. Sammy Igo, he's a player that did the rounds. I mean, he played 7 games for us. It's been the ill-fated. I mean, we're going from the sublime to the ridiculous, the 2005-2006 season. He's one of many. I think we had about 40 or 50 players that season, Neil, didn't we? It was a chaotic season after the high points of 2001. To go to this just 4 years later was incredible. And I've picked him out really just out of a sense of sympathy for Sammy I, because he wasn't exactly a classic player, but I was just admiring the number of clubs he's played for: Pompey, Reading, Luton, Swindon, Bristol, Hereford, Bournemouth, ourselves obviously, then Havant and Waterlooville, Gosport, Borough, Bognor Regis. He's done the rounds of small time
clubs on the south coast,
southwest clubs. That's right. Vastly experienced. I think that's a great choice of words in the little biography that's in Neil's book. Do buy it, listeners. I recommend it. It's a Mill classic already. So I picked out Sammy Igo, and then I've also mentioned in passing Sean Dyche, who gave a lot more to the club. He's only here for a very relatively brief period, 1999 to 2002. 76 games and 3 goals, but what a solid defender he was, Neil.
Right at the end of his career, wasn't it? I think he made his name at Chesterfield in that.
That's right.
In that FA Cup run, didn't he? I think where they got to the semi-finals and David Ellery robbed them of a cup final place. But absolutely, right. But the great thing about that side was you actually had a solid professional like him playing alongside a young player like Joe Dolan, and then we had the Spice Boys in midfield, didn't we? The likes of Cahill, Reed, Iffy, Christoph Kinney wouldn't have been too old, but I think he was probably older than the rest of them. And then we had an untried youngster up front, Harris. Untried is probably a bit harsh. He would
have been blooded young, hadn't he, because of circumstances? Yeah.
I think he'd played for 3 or 4 seasons, and then we had Moody up top. So it was a classical blend of your experience and your youth, that side, and that's what I think made it so good. And there wasn't that much money in the game at that time, so you could probably relate to these players a little bit more than you can now.
I mean, Paul Moody was, again, in the latter stages of his career. I think he'd been, is it Oxford he came from? Was it?
Oxford.
Southampton, I think, as well. Yeah, he'd done the rounds. Man Mountain of a strike. I love Paul Moody, Neil.
Fulham, I think he played for.
Yeah, I mean, as a target man, but one of the classic image of the target man, he was everything that you'd expect him to be. Big man, solidly built. But reasonably skillful when he's given the opportunity on the floor as well, which I don't think he ever got much credit for that part of his game. But great striker and part of one of the classic duos of Mill history. The other point I just wanted to make before we close on that is Sean Dyche. Success is a strange thing, isn't it? Because I never would have expected him to go on to become a top flight Premier League manager. There's no clue particularly. I suppose he's a good defender, but you wouldn't. You might, I don't know what traits you look for, but it just, success can be a random thing at times, and he's gone on to better things in the managerial. He's best known now as being a top flight manager rather than a very good solid defender. It's just odd how it works. So there's my choice of Reading fixture, 3-4 in 2001, win for Millwall. You've also gone for a win, Neil. A Reading away win.
I've gone back to the 23rd of January 1933, so you might remember it, Nick. 2-0 winning. It was an FA Cup replay, third round replay.
It was.
And funnily enough, it shouldn't ever have got there, basically, because we were 2-0 up in the first game at New Cross at the Den.
At Millwall, that's right, Cobler Lane, yeah.
And the game was abandoned with 17 minutes to play when we were 2-0 up because of fog. You're going to love this. I picked out, it was out of the Reynolds newspaper, which I think was London.
Okay.
And the match report for that 2-0 win said the Millwall's goalkeeper, who was a guy called Willie Wilson, who was an ex-miner, Scotsman.
Right.
remained in his place for some time after the final whistle had sounded. And many spectators, too, had to wait until they were told the game had been called off. Yeah, well, how the newspaper reporter knew that was quite beyond me, because he said how bad the conditions were and how you couldn't see anything. Yet somehow he managed to see Willie Wilson stood in his goal mouth, not being able to see what was going on at the other end of the pitch. So it must have been. So if the dressing rooms were in the same place, he must have been down by the old Jews Hill.
I reckon he's applied artistic license to that. But
I think he has. Yeah, I think he has.
I don't. I was reading a completely different article today talking about the power of good stories, whether they're true or not, and their ability to motivate people. And I think that's a good story, not necessarily factual, but it's a good story, Neil. And that's really all. That's the nature of the trade, isn't it? That's the
yeah. And apparently, Reading was totally out of this game, and Millwall on top. And we came back and we had to replay the game, obviously, and we drew 1-1.
Right.
Which is just a Millwall way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Which meant an away game at Reading. But coincidentally, we actually lost 2 days before that up at Lincoln. So the Saturday we went to Lincoln and lost 2-0 in the second division, as it was back then. And then
we've gone to that would have been Elm Park, wouldn't it?
Elm Park on the Monday.
Yeah,
a Monday replay. Yeah,
Monday afternoon, listeners, younger listeners, no floodlights in these times. Yeah,
yeah. Funnily enough, I was just watching the FA Cup last night and lamenting how we've had to do away with replays in these games to suit the Premier League, and so we go to Reading and we win 2-0.
That is very Millwall.
Albert Bloxham with one of the goals and George Bond with the other. But Willie Watson was a player I picked out purely because he couldn't see what was going on and was probably freezing his nuts off.
Interesting. I mean, the first game was a band of fog, and it just struck me. I didn't have your Reynolds newspaper. This was I looked at the Daily Mirror of that first fixture, Millwall unlucky, it says, and fog stops game at New Cross. Interestingly, this must have been the old fog of smoke coal era, listeners, because smog it became known as in the 50s until there was a Clean Air Act passed and they started to do away with coal fires. But fog back then, Neil, must have been pretty dire, because I'm just looking at a report from Charlton, who they continued their game against Bolton in the same fog, which obviously is down the road from us. But the reporter confesses in this Daily Mirror report he couldn't see the other touchline, and they was only aware of an attack when the ball found its way over to the left side, wherever he was, he could see there's a mild Charlton level of protest at the continuation of the game. And just to read, this is from the Charlton-Bolton game. The fog thickened, and then they began a mild demonstration against the referee for continuing with the game. The spectators set up a continuous whistle and flares from lighted newspapers and other articles flashing all around the ground. No mobile phones back then, kids, to light up and protest.
No dildos thrown on the pitch, which I think Birmingham are planning to do, aren't they, this weekend or something?
They are. That's a bizarre story.
Road, the mist rolling in from the Thames, as they say.
Maybe that's where the song comes from, where they couldn't say. I don't know if they won it or lost it. I didn't get that far. No, they got beat. No match for Bolton, listeners. So they got beat in the fog. Although the reporter for the Daily Mirror confesses he couldn't see half the game. There we are.
Yeah, they can't see half the game anyway if you read some reports, even in modern times, when it's clear view.
Absolutely. So there we are. Millwall, Reading 0, Millwall 2. That game was played January 23rd, 1933. And no, Neil, I wasn't born then. That was my dad wasn't born then. He'd be born
coincidentally, we actually lost the older shot in the 4th round. So
that's Millwall all over, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we must be about the only team that played about 4-5 games from from the third round and only get as far as the fourth round. It's typical Millwall, isn't it? But
That's
you can
the
just
way
imagine. Yeah, we can just imagine the referee. He must have been a brave man to have called off that game.
Oh,
With
can you imagine the
17
abuse he
minutes
would
to
have
play.
taken? It wouldn't have been whistles and lighted newspapers. It would have been a few more fruity Dockers insults. You can fill in the gaps yourself, dear listener. So there we are. That's Reading. That's our first fixture of March. We also then move on to the Blackbird game, which is the rearranged fixture, which was also abandoned, of course. In let's say there was subterfuge involved in that abandonment. That's going to be replayed on the Tuesday, the 8th of March. We did cover that fixture in our previous show, so I've agreed with Neil that we're going to refer the honourable listener to our previous show rather than talk about Blackbird.
Yeah, just so we don't bore them twice.
We bore him enough for nothing already. So no, you're gonna have to check out the previous history show if you want to recall that particular fixture. We're not going to do that one again. So we're going to move on then after that, Neil, to Millwall at home to Middlesbrough, and I've chosen a fixture from 1904, dear listeners. So I know this is the way I do it.
I think I looked at that one and decided it was too early.
Too obscure. Nothing's too early for me. 1904, played at North Greenwich, which is now called Millwall Park, near to Mudchute Station on the Dockland Railway. We lost to Middlesbrough 2-0, and I found it because I just like the report of it being played. Middlesbrough having to play against a strong wind in the second half. That would have been a strong wind coming off the water because it was very close to the riverside there, wasn't it? It was right in the middle, literally, of the docks, the Isle of Dogs docks.
Yeah, you can just imagine how bleak it would have been because they wouldn't have had. It would have been absolutely bloody freezing, wouldn't it? Let's face it. And
but
then again, they're hardy stuff, Northerners, aren't they? Apparently, yeah, would have been nothing in Middlesbrough.
I know the Isle of Dogs denizens were hardy, that's for sure, and you'd expect the borough to I don't know how many would have travelled down for that, probably not many. This was an FA Cup game, listeners, 2-0 win for Middlesbrough. I've got a newspaper. This is the Daily Mirror again, dated the 8th of February 1904. These two teams met at North Greenwich, and Middlesbrough, after a very good game, were returned the victors by 2-0. Millwall were rather unfortunate in being without Hulse, and I thought the name Hulse always lives in every Millwall fan's memory. Not Rob, we're talking about Benjamin Hulse. More of him in a moment. And Moran. Joey Gettins was deputising for Hulse at centre, was not quite up to form, and the forward line suffered as a consequence. So we had a big loss with our forward line there. So I thought we haven't covered Ben Hulse, Neil, in previous content. I don't remember doing so. If we have, forgive me. So again, I've reverted to the very excellent Millwall Who's Who to find out more about Ben Hulse, Benjamin Daniel Hulse. 1901, played for us to 1904, 111 games and 66 goals. Dangerous striker by the sounds of it from those numbers.
Yeah, but Liverpudlian, I think, started off up north actually, didn't he? Playing for Liverpool, Southend, Rock Ferry, Blackburn Rovers, New Brighton Tower. I think there was a club you wanted to talk about. And
a Liverpool player, and the name of New Brighton Tower struck me because it's not a name I'd seen, but I'd heard that. I remember New Brighton being in, I think, the third division when it was formed, post First World War, but I hadn't heard of New Brighton Tower. But Ben played for us for 3 seasons, as I say, 66 goals across 111 games. Born in 1875, passing away in 1950. After retiring from football, as is often the way for players of that era, he went back to labouring in the docks. So hard men, hard times, hard men. But New Brighton Tower, I'd never heard of, Neil, so I had to look them up on Wikipedia. And New Brighton is a kind of like a seaside resort on Merseyside. Now I can't think of much more bleak place to go on your holidays than New Brighton on the River Mersey. Can you? It must be a
they probably didn't want to go to Blackpool, did they? So they but it's probably a Scouse version of Blackpool. Yeah,
So,
no, we're
yeah,
going to
that's
get
right.
cancelled for that, aren't we? Now somebody's going to take umbrage at that.
New Brighton Tower was a seaside attraction built to rival the Blackpool Tower. It was built near Liverpool. And the owner of the New Brighton Tower decided that there was a need for winter entertainment, and so he formed this New Brighton FC, New Brighton Tower FC. The club was never successful and was wound up in 1901, drawing gates of averaging around 1,000 fans. And even the follow-up club in 1921, which was just plain New Brighton, would also play in the Football League from 1923 till 1951, a long 30 odd years. But again, they also went bust. Clearly not a viable setup. I suppose you're competing against Liverpool, Everton, and even to some extent Tranmere around there.
Yeah, I think Ben Hulse actually joined us when they went bust. So there was obviously an auction of players or something. Yeah, but God knows how Bob Hunter got to hear about him. But
he must have. Well, he was a shrewd manager, and he must have had his ears open. They were Lancashire League champions in 1897 to 98 in their brief period of existence. This is New Brighton Tower, and they played in salmon pink and black, which I think are great colours. So there we are. I just wanted to mention Ben Hulse because he's a striker who made some contribution to early century history, and I also wanted to mention New Brighton Tower because I just like to mention these odd little things along the way. It's part of the charm of our show, Neil, isn't it? That we go off on these tangents.
definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, we like to remember these people that are long forgotten in Millwall.
Give them a passing mention if we can. So there we are. That's my choice. 1904, a 2-0 loss to Middlesbrough. But you've gone for a win, 1965 win, Neil, over Middlesbrough.
Yeah, I've gone for a League Cup tie. Obviously, a competition. It would have been in its embryonic stages. I think it probably hadn't been going 4 or 5 years at that time, and it's really a competition that we've never gone very far in. We've never got beyond the quarterfinals 3 times. I think 74, 77 and 95.
That's right.
So it's a competition that we've never. It never excites me, the League Cup. I don't know why. The FA Cup, yeah, you get that buzz, don't you? But the League Cup, it generally played midweek evenings, and there's never the same excitement about it, does it? I didn't even watch the final on Sunday afternoon, and
it's been going a long time now. You're right. I mean, this is 1965. I think it was founded in 61 or 62.
Yeah.
And it's always had this kind of Cinderella quality. I agree with you. There's no love for it in a way that there is a love of the cup. We have good seasons in the cup, FA Cup. I'm talking about, and we have bad seasons, but you're always interested. You're always excited to see who we're going to get and the big game fixture at the Den. But somehow the League Cup never gets the electricity flowing, does it? Somehow.
No, it doesn't get the juices flowing, and it's just one of those things. You're not bothered if you win. You're not bothered if you lose, really, are you?
No. That's the death of a competition when that happens, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And we drew. I think we actually drew up there and came back down for a replay, or it could even have been 2 legs back then. And Middlesbrough were actually managed by Rach Carter, famous name from the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Was he one of the high transfer figures?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was. He was a top interwar striker.
Yeah.
Along the same lines as Dixie Dean and people like that, then went into management, played for England. But Billy Gray, this caught my attention. Billy Gray gambled on playing his 16-year-old nephew, John Richardson, in this game.
His nephew?
Who only months before had been playing schools football in Wandsworth.
Can you imagine Gary Rowett playing his nephew from schools football in a Carabao Cup
game? Is right. H would have an absolute stroke, wouldn't they?
Can you imagine the House of Fun? It would be Febron on there with giving full vent to their conspiracy theory on that, wouldn't they? But somehow that was football back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, we drew 0-0 away, and then I'm just reading my notes here, and then it was 1-1 after 90 minutes. I think it was Dave Jones scored for us.
Right. Extra time
And
winner.
we went on. We were second. We were actually third division then, because I think we were third division leaders.
Yeah, would that be our promotion season?
I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
65, 66, wasn't it?
Yeah, on the way back to the second division, yeah.
And the other goals were scored by Billy Neal, still around.
Yes, he is, yeah. Long may it
And
be so.
Ben Julians, who I think has departed.
Right.
But I just picked out John Richardson. I think he only played 2 games for us.
This was his nephew, yeah.
Yeah, and Billy Gray turns to his nephew to fill in for Tommy Wilson.
Can you imagine the crowd on this one, Neil?
Unbelievable!
They would have got slaughtered, wouldn't they?
Yeah, well, I could just imagine H having a meltdown now on the podcast afterwards, can't you?
Gary Rowett's nephew's playing.
Yeah. And to make it worse, he actually followed his uncle to Brentford, where he would earn his first professional contract.
That sounds
I think he played for Fulham and when they won promotion in 71, but just one of those fleeting players in Millwall history. But quite interestingly, after he finished playing, he actually worked as a funeral director.
Gets better and better, that story, doesn't it?
It does, but just typical Millwall, isn't it? Yeah, well, we dump out Middlesbrough 3-1. Rach Carter's having absolute kittens, according to the newspaper reports I read of the game. And then we go and get stuffed by Peterborough 4-1 in the 4th round. So,
Millwally, not Spursy, Millwally. Oh dear!
Yeah, but not Spursy. Yeah, no, this was long before Spursy. This was Millwally. But a competition that I don't think anybody really gives 2 tosses about, do they, these days?
Not really. I mean, I searched that that result and found it. This is a copy of the Daily Mirror, again dated Tuesday, October the 19th, 1965. So they don't actually have a report for the game listeners. All it's got is the kind of classified listing in their results summary there. But my eye was caught by a mention of Millwall, and on the same page there is no report from this fixture, so I'm not going to, can't do anything on that. But Billy Gray is actually mentioned in quite a large story here, Neil, about Romford playing Luton in the FA Cup. This is like the looming first round was going to be looming. And we're mentioned in the context of Romford's goalkeeper, Steve Earle, who was a one-time West Ham keeper. I don't know his name at all, and was a World Cup player with Australia, playing for Romford. And Billy Gray has given him a month's trial, and he's done some trades. Gray's quoted as saying that his third division pacemakers, having drawn Wealdstone in the first round of the cup, that Steve Earle has done some training with us, and he looked very useful. But if Romford are prepared to offer him terms, I won't stand in his way. That's the most, he looks very good. But if Romford want to offer him a contract, we can go there. We don't want him.
Yeah, but it's
surreal story. It's quite a large story. I mean, I don't know that a non-league club will get quite that amount of coverage nowadays for one of their player.
Yeah, no, that was when non-league football was big. Funnily enough, I did manage to find a match report, but I did find it in the Daily Mail.
Okay.
And written by Roy Peskett. Billy Gray made it perhaps the biggest gamble of his Millwall managership when he named his 16-year-old nephew, John Richardson, for last night's League Cup replay with Middlesbrough. But it paid off. Millwall are through to a 4th round home tie with Peterborough. Richardson, who was playing school football for Wandsworth only a few months ago, looked inexperienced at times, but stuck to his job well.
I bet he did.
Millwall outlasted and outshot their second division opponents and gave a warning At the moment, they're almost invincible at the Den. Yeah, well, they were until Peterborough went down there and won 4-1 in the next
That's
round.
right. Yeah,
Days
that's
later.
right.
Last night was like the Roaring 30s.
Wow. Great report. Great report. Good choice. I love that story. Billy Gray signing his nephew.
And played him.
And then playing fast and loose with Romford's goalkeeper. It's a great advert. I'm just looking at this page. You can't see it, listeners. So I'm breaking every rule of radio by talking about something you can't see. But it's a great advert for Vitalis hairdressing, and there's Billy Walker, the British heavyweight champion, who uses Vitalis hairdressing to keep his hair neat all day without grease, Neil. Without grease. Great picture of Billy making the old boxing kind of stance and endorsing this hairdressing stuff. Anyway, I've totally gone off on a tangent there, as is our way. So good choice there, Neil. But we've got to move along, and we're going to move along now to Huddersfield Town. And I've gone for a fixture from 2008, a 2-1 win for Millwall, and I would have been at this game. I think I can vaguely remember it. Because it was probably one of the high points of Lewis Grabban's career. It was 2 goals there from a long-forgotten player who was actually quite good for us. There's Trezor Candle, who scored in the 37th minute, we'd gone behind in the 18th to Huddersfield. So he's equalised. Trezor Candle, I think, was a Leeds United player on loan to us. And then Lewis
scored after
Grabban.
about 30 seconds of his debut, didn't he? At the start of that season against Oldham. I do remember that.
He was a player never quite. I mean, I don't know. The deal never took off, and nothing happened after a relatively short space of loan. But his return was quite good, Trezor Candle. But I picked out Lewis Grabban because he's become a boo boy, and the rights and wrongs of that. Who can say? But he was certainly maligned in the famous Mike Calvin book, hiding in the toilets at was that Reading, Yeovil, I think it was, where he's hid in as my old granddad would have called it, trap number 1, hid out and wouldn't
Hereford,
come out.
wasn't it?
Was it Hereford? Somewhere it was a hard away trip at somewhere where you probably don't want to find yourself if you have aspirations for top flight football, which he clearly did. But I've picked him out because he was a very talented boy, remains a very talented player, and he is maligned. And, he doesn't help himself sometimes with, some of the choices perhaps he's made. And I think he can be, perhaps a difficult squad member at times. But he played 61 times for the Lions, 11 goals. But he came to us from Crystal Palace. I think he was seen as quite a signing when we made him. And I think it was Kenny Jackett, or was it Willie Donachie? I can't remember. Well, either Donachie or Jackett signed him. And I think he was rated quite highly when he arrived. But I think he fulfilled that promise later on in his career. We'll go on to play in the Premier League, of course, which was with Bournemouth. I think they were Premier League when he played. Or Norwich, sorry, he played for them as well. So another player that the promise wasn't apparent for us, but he did go on to achieve some measure of success later on in his career.
Yeah, he was actually signed by Kenny Jackett as a replacement
for
Ben May, referring back to my Millwall Who's Who book. When I think May was sold, so he would have been very raw. Smacks a lot of when we get Chris Armstrong off Palace as well.
Chris Armstrong, yeah.
He went to Palace, didn't he? And I think we got a couple of players in exchange. So
I think Armstrong was a very good player, and I think it was a forced sale because I think we were probably in financial, as we ever are.
Well, he went to Palace, didn't he? And I think we got. Did we get Jamie Morley in return or something? We
did. Jamie Morley. But yeah, I mean, Lewis Grabban. I mean, I think you're right. I think he struggled to establish himself at a number of clubs, and he would. I think to achieve Premier League football, he played with Norwich and then AFC Bournemouth in the Premier League. Probably matched his ability. He probably held himself back in some. Looking at the number of clubs he's played for over time, you get a sense of someone who I don't know, how can we put it? Has his own ideas on life. I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. But I just wanted to mention him because he's become a boo boy, Neil, and sometimes it blinds you to a kind of cool assessment of a player, and he actually didn't do badly for us back
Yeah, we
in
paid
tough times.
150 grand for him,
We did, we did.
and when he went for 8 million, I think everybody was scratching their heads because I don't think he hadn't pulled up any trees anywhere he'd been. Then all of a sudden he went for 8 million quid, and I think people,
yeah.
but he's actually got longevity, hasn't he?
He's persistent, and he'll always get flack if he ever comes back to the Den. He'll get flack, and maybe he deserves some of it. I don't know. I think the Mike Calvin book did his reputation no good at all. I mean, he got slightly character assassinated there, didn't he? And he's gone on to achieve greater value later through his career. But there we are, 1988. So what's that make him now? 34. He's coming towards the end of his career, realistically now. So one of our names from the past. You've gone for a 4-0 win, Neil.
Against
Huddersfield. 1986-87 season.
Yeah, 13th of January. So it was just before Christmas. And it was really, I saw the attendance for this game. And
I'm just looking at that.
That's what pulled it out in my mind. So I had a little look throughout that season. And bear in mind, this was the season before we actually won the second division title.
Yeah.
And our crowds were pitiful. This was watched by 3,515. And we struggled to get above 6,000 for a game against the Nigels, against Palace later on that season. That only attracted 6,000 people. But it was John Doherty's first season in charge, and we were hovering in and around the bottom of the table most of that season, weren't we, Nick?
Yeah, these were tough times. In fact, I said on a show the other day that in the 80s it became a real struggle for me personally to get to football at all, to be honest. And if memory serves, Neil, this season, I think we were working under a punishment, an FA punishment. I think we had been made to have all of our games made all ticket, which doesn't sound that much nowadays, but at the time you couldn't just turn up to pay on the turnstile, and it really punished Millwall because that's obviously how football was. Well, for your and my youth, you just went to football and you paid at the turnstile. This predated. I mean, there was no online sales then, listeners. You had to get a ticket. So short of having a season ticket, which I personally couldn't do, wasn't in a position to do back then. You had to physically get yourself up to the Den and buy a ticket in the week before a game or whenever they were on sale. And it made for
organised.
Yeah, not possible. It made it very difficult. And I think if you look at the attendance for that whole season, they were hovering around the 3,000 level because that was the punishment. I think it was for the Luton riot. I think it was a fallout from that. We were working under an FA order of some sort at that point because I think we have to play an away. Blackburn, we were drawn at home to Blackburn in the cup, and we had to play them away because of a FA punishment or something of that order, like for the season before. I think it was an all-ticket order, and you're right. I mean, I'm just looking at the same attendance, 3,500. And believe me, listeners, as much as the Den was a cauldron of the old Den was a cauldron of excitement on its day, when it was empty like that, it was. Felt like a tombstone, Neil, didn't it, on some of these low attendance games,
Yeah, you'd almost have seen the tumbleweed, wouldn't you? Flying around the place.
Absolutely.
But this game, but it's the attendance that caught my attention, and then the fact that Teddy Sheringham scored a hat-trick.
He did, yeah.
All of Millwall's goals came in the second half. Dave Byrne got the other one.
Dave Byrne, yeah.
And one of the Sunday match reports, or it might have been one of the Mondays, Sheringham was watched by Bill Nicholson, who was
Bill Nicholson
manager. He was a talent spotter, and apparently Arsenal and Everton were watching him. And the Daily Mirror, it was commentated, hard up Millwall are unlikely to reject a good offer.
That should be the club. That should be the club motto, Neil. I don't know if you can put that in Latin. Make that the club motto. Hard up, Millwall.
I'll tell you what, it's a good job that we didn't, because his hat tricks, I think, took his tally to the seat for the season to 13.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
John Doherty had set him a target of 25. But if somebody had made a good offer, would we have got promoted this following season?
That's one of the great what ifs.
The great
Yeah.
ramifications for Millwall, unlikely to reject a good offer.
that, as I say, that should be put in Latin and made round the lion as our club motto. I'm just looking at the same copy of the Daily, I think it's the Daily Mirror that you're looking at there, Neil. And on the same page, just in that same spirit of unlikely to turn down a good offer, there's John Fashanu celebrating for Wimbledon, having scored a goal, again, a real beauty as it's described against Sheffield Wednesday, Wimbledon on the up, and the Lions very much on the financial back foot at this time. I love Teddy Sheringham, and again, he's another one that's become, I don't know if he's a boo boy. I think it's certain kids of a certain age, I think, poke fun at him for his whichever club he went to, but he claims to have been a boyhood fan of. And I think it must have become I think he was having a laugh with some of it because he didn't say that at Colchester or somewhere like that.
It was like a lifelong dream, wasn't it? And I do remember when the Dockers Day that they got Doc's team back for. He almost became like a pantomime villain walking around the pitch, and I think everybody was taking the mickey out of him, all of his former teammates, and he appeared to take it in good heart, in good spirit. I'm not sure. I'm not sure too. Yeah, well, I can remember we used to sit in the family stand at the time. Well, even the kids were booing him, and they had no idea what they were booing.
No, they wouldn't know who he was. He was a great player. He was a
fantastic player, and shouldn't be remembered, I think, for one or two things that some press officer might have written in a press release. Poetic license.
That's the internet for you, isn't it? Once it catches hold on the internet, it becomes a thing. But a great contributor to Mill history. Neil Harris, obviously, in the end, would take away his club record goal scoring tally. But Teddy Sheringham, the reason that obviously he made a great contribution to our promotion season, Neil, and arguably this season to us retaining second division status, because that wasn't cut and dried for most of this particular season, 86-87. But he would also stick around when we got relegated from the first division and would score, was it 38 goals in a season in the 1991 season? When we were back in Division 2, he almost single-handedly took us very, very. I think he got us into the playoffs, and it all went square. Didn't it? Was that Brighton that playoff season? I'm very much floundering my memory on this, listeners. But
it was that season.
I have a huge amount of time for Teddy because that was a wonderful. Him scoring 38 goals, part of a good, entertaining season that would slightly go wrong against Brighton, but that for me was a spectacle that I put in one of my favourite Millwall moments of my life, actually, because it was just a huge achievement. And he didn't have to stay. He could have gone on. Could have been taking a transfer when we got relegated.
I think he was almost like a one-man team in that 1991 season. I think Alex Ray was the second leading scorer on about 10 or 11.
Yeah, absolutely. 38 goals. I stand to be corrected, listeners. So if anyone can correct me, I think it's 38.
Yeah, he scored 33 in the league. I've just looked up, and then I just couldn't be bothered to look at the rest on Richard Lindsay's.
A wonderful player.
Who goes or complete record as it goes too far down. But almost single-handedly got us in the playoffs. You're right, that season.
Absolutely. But these were, you're right, 4-0 win over Huddersfield at home at Cobler Lane. 13th of December 1986, in front of just 3,500. Tough times. I didn't get to many games that season because it was such a performance to get your tickets. But anyway, there we are. That was the intention of I think it was a punishment, an FA punishment. So we're going to move on to Stoke City, Neil. You've gone for an away win, 1993, 14th of August.
Opening game of the season, I believe.
Yeah, and I've found a report for it actually. But it's your game, so
I think it was Bruce Murray's debut, and I've picked him out as a
yeah,
player to talk about. Actually, it was somebody who I think he arrived on trial that summer, didn't he, to join Casey Keller and John Kerr.
yeah, because the report I've got mentions the three Americans, Yankee Doddle dandy. This win they're calling
Yeah, and
Bruce Murray, John Kerr, and Casey Keller, all
I
American.
think we had a lot of injuries at the time, so
Mm.
yeah, it just seems strange that Millwall signing Americans, really, doesn't it?
Yeah,
And
there was
we go on
we had
about
a
foreign players and how Millwall don't sign them, but you look down through Millwall's history, and there's been quite a few.
we've always been. I mean, certainly at this period, you're right. I mean, John Kerr, I think, was the scorer of the very first goal at the new Den when it was constructed, and Casey Keller was a wonderful goalkeeper, a classic kind of Mill name. Bruce Murray was more your workhorse, wasn't he? He never really lifted me off my seat in excitement, but he was always give you a. He was like a 75% type of player. You know, you knew what you were going to get from him without lifting out of your, out of body experience watching him.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't in the same class as Jamie Morley or John Goodman, I think, who were
No,
also around at the time. They were more established, better players, better goal scorers, I think. But as you say, he was somebody that had come off the bench or go in. But he was actually quite late on in his career. He was born in '66, so he'd been pushing 20,
yeah,
27, 28 at this stage. Hadn't
yeah,
ever played in anything like this
this
standard of
level.
football. I think you've probably got the same match report as I have
This is
from Sunday Mirror.
no, I've got one. It's actually the Staffordshire Evening Sentinel. It's actually quite a.
Ah,
It's like a local paper, obviously, listeners.
yeah, but the headline's exactly the same, so it must have been written by the same bloke. Yankee Doddle.
Yankee Doddle, that's right. Lions yank the carpet from under City. A lot of Yankees doing a lot of work there. Yankee yank. Good
Bruce Murray
results.
admitted in this match report, I may have 91 international caps, but that was the toughest game I've ever faced. Fast, furious, with the offside trap too. But the score on your debut is just great. It was a bit of a shock to be in the team at all, but you have to take advantage, and hopefully I did. But I think John Kerr had missed a sitter in this game, according to this match report as well.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right as well. I mean the Lions side I've got here: Casey Keller, Kenny Cunningham, Ian Dawes. That would be Gavin Maguire, wouldn't it?
Yes,
Gavin
it would be
Maguire.
Gavin Maguire. Yep.
And I'm going to guess that it's probably Tony McCarthy rather than Mick McCarthy. I'm
It
guessing.
was Tony McCarthy. Yep.
This is like a quiz show, listeners, isn't it? There's Keith Stevens, Andy Roberts, Ian Bogey, Bruce Murray, substituted for David Byrne. John
Yep.
Byrne. Dave Byrne. John Kerr, Tony Dolby, and substitutes not used were Richard Huxford and Carl Emberson. Richard Huxford deserves a mention, doesn't he? He's one of those obscure players that their name pops up from time to time when you do research for podcast listeners. And I actually can't. I can remember him being there. I can remember him being part of a squad. But I can't remember anything he ever did on the field of play all these years later.
I think he was part of the good Barnet team, wasn't he?
Barnet, he came from Barnet.
Bit later, when Barnet got promoted to the Football League, I think he played with.
Yeah.
I think he played up there, but Ian Bogey, great player, wasn't he?
I liked Ian Bogey, very skillful. For part of that diamond kind of season, we had a midfield diamond. And along with John McGinley, there's another player of that era. I used to like them. They were skillful and nimble on the ball. This result here, was it we played Southend and got beat? Was it that the week before we got on TV? It was like one of the early games at the New Den, and we got beat by Southend at home. I think we got a 4-1 beating or something like that. I don't know if that week before this or.
I don't think so, because this was the opening game of the season.
Oh, okay. Must have been a previous season in
The
that
opening
case.
game, yeah. And funnily enough, you mentioned Tony McCarthy in the match report I've got. Millwall's other US international keeper Casey Keller was also outsmarted by his own teammate Tony McCarthy. Under pressure, McCarthy attempted a lofted 25-yard back pass,
Yeah.
but when he looked up, he realised Keller was well out of the goal, expecting a close on the ground pass. Keller tried his best to get back, but watched in agony as the ball rolled into the net for a bizarre own goal equaliser. Thank God that was away. You can imagine if that was at home, Tony McCarthy would never have lived that down, and neither would Keller. It'd still be remembered to this day, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. As you say, it was the opening game of the season. I've just got the Millwall history website up, listeners. The 4-1 loss that I'm thinking of was the week after. I thought it was the week before, but it was the week after. That would be our first home league game at the new stadium, as it was then. We got beat by Southend, and actually led us into a pretty poor run of form. Neil, we got beat versus after this win, which is a good start to the season. We then got beat by Southend at home. We've gone to Wolves and got beat 2-0, and then Leicester. We've got stuff 4-0 there. We've got a draw against that's the Anglo-Italian against Charlton. I'm not going to count that, and we'd have to wait until September for our first home league, our first win in the new stadium. That was a 2-0 win over Barnsley. It was a bit of a difficult baptism at the new ground, wasn't it, when you look back?
Yeah, and I can actually remember a game a little bit later, Watford. I think John Goodman scored a hat-trick in that.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything was brand spanking shiny new. It still had that new smell of concrete, didn't it? And we didn't settle into it for a long time, did we? It wasn't the Den. I know it was called the New Den, but it wasn't home, was it?
It hadn't become home. The crowds weren't exactly brilliant because the whole thing was premised on we were going to be, offered. We were talking about catering earlier on in the show, listeners, and we're going to be offered an array of fast food, weren't we? As we walked through the turnstile, we were going to be fighting off the McDonald's and the Burger King and the Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets,
and the Pizza Hut,
Hut. None of which ever happened, did it?
You're a dear old Reg. He made us those promises, and we're still waiting for them, old son.
I believed him. I believed everything Reg said, and still do to this day. The season would actually come good. It would finish up in playoff football. That would be the game of the Derby, infamous Derby playoffs, and we'll draw a veil over that and say there was one or two shenanigans that night, which but it's in the 93-94 season. But it was a difficult start to life at Zampa Road for us after a good away win, which Neil's picked out here, 2-1 win at Stoke City. Now my game that I've picked out here is not particularly notable. I went for Stoke City 4, Millwall 0 in the FA Cup. This is in 1936, 15th of January. So not particularly inspiring result from the Millwall perspective, listeners. But the reason I picked it out is that the match report, which says that Stoke were some way ahead of us, featured one of the great names of world football, certainly British and English football, Sir Stanley Matthews. And I thought actually it might be a good chance just to mention Sir Stanley Matthews, Neil, because he is one of the greats, isn't he? Named by players of the level of Pelé and foreign players, Beckenbauer naming him as their inspiration for taking up the game in the first place. And I just thought it might be worth mentioning Sir Stanley Matthews, who played his part in this hammering of the Lions that day. But what a great, if you read his Wikipedia article, listeners, I mean, there'd be books and whatnot, and I just read Wiki. A man of some skill, I mean, speed and skill, I think, are the hallmarks of Sir Stanley Matthews. He becomes Sir Stanley Matthews, the first footballer to be knighted, I believe.
Wizard of Dribble, wasn't it?
Wizard of Dribble, European Football of the Year, Football Writers Association Football of the Year. I think that might have been in the 50s. The only player to be knighted while still playing the game. He played on league football at the age of 50, Neil. Can you imagine that? He was turning out for Stoke late in his career. born in 1915. His career, like so many, would be affected by the impact of the Second World War. And as the article here puts it, he lost 6 years to the Second World War, and he would resume playing after the war at a fairly advanced age, but he managed to keep himself fit enough to be able to take up the professional game after the conflict. He would also take part in famous Matthews Cup final of 1953 when Blackpool would make a comeback against Bolton Wanderers, I believe. And he actually rejected that term, Neil. He said it was the Stan Mortensen final, because I think Stan Mortensen scored a hat-trick, but became forgotten by the side of Stanley Matthews winning his first medal, because he had this glittering career in the game, but had never actually got much in the way of silverware to show for it. But that would be his moment, that famous final.
Yeah, coincidentally, it was actually a medal that he later claimed was lost, and the FA actually replaced. But I think if you speak to anybody in Blackpool, everybody knows who's got the medal, and he appears on Dickinson's Real Deal.
Okay. It seems to be very well thought of. I'm just looking at the the kind of the career is magnificent. He played for England. He would play in the famous losses to 6-3 against the Hungarians, which my dad would always tell me was like watching a different football being played in a different level, in a way that just hadn't been seen before by the famous Hungarian side. I mean, some of the names he's played with, and would the games he'd be involved in. It's a magnificent career. He would also play in the World Cup with England when we did finally take part in it. I think he played in 1950 as well. I think he was part of that side that went out ignominiously to the USA. Interesting guy as well. He seems quite the modern phrase is humble, Neil. He seemed like quite a down to earth kind of guy as a person. He seemed there's a picture of him he's clearly in his he looks 50 years old, but he's sitting there with some of the younger players playing for Stoke in 1962, sharing a laugh with them. And he looks like the kind of bloke that wants to play football and part of a team that there's a certain personality it just takes to the game, and that was very much Sir Stanley Matthews. I just wanted to mention him because he's one of the great names of the game, and he featured in this match.
You've done very well finding him playing against Millwall, because I think when we did the show earlier in the season, I was trying to find a game that he actually played against us at home, and I couldn't find one.
So I had a report and I've lost it, but he featured. He featured in this particular game against Stoke. I did have the report. If I find it, I'll send it over to you separately. But the report was largely Stoke-based, and they've clearly taken us to the cleaners and then some, because a 4-0 win at Stoke. And the report mentioned that we were distinctively the poorest side. But it mentioned Stanley Matthews featuring. And, this is one of the great names. You can put him in the same sentence as take your pick: Maradona, Johan Cruyff, Pele, Gerd Müller, Ronaldo nowadays, and Lionel Messi, and you would say also in that sentence Sir Stanley Matthews. Would you agree with that, Neil?
Yeah,
that's just my take on it.
He's definitely one of the all-time greats of the English game, isn't he? And
yeah, absolutely
rightly remembered. But this was a Millwall side managed by Bill McCracken.
Right.
And it was just before the legendary Charlie Hewitt took over the following season. And we got to an FA Cup semi-final the season after.
Okay.
Didn't we, in 37?
In 37, we did. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And it was just before we just started to build. We just started that ambition. And I'm planning to do a podcast on it with you at some point. Probably have to wait until the summer.
Yeah, no, when we get a bit more time on our
And
hands.
just to actually talk about that, but in a little bit more depth. But it definitely, it was just before we threatened, where we showed a lot of ambition. We were very well supported. They started to improve the den, and we started looking as if we were going to do something in the game. But Stanley Matthews, great player, big name. And you've done
Absolutely.
well to find him playing against Millwall, because
I found the report. It's the Daily Herald, listeners, which was I don't think that existed. It went out of business. I think it merged with the Sun, the Daily Herald, I believe. But the 1936 edition, 16th of January. The report says Millwall beaten at every stage. Stoke City 4, Millwall 0. The report says there was never much doubt about the result. It might have been thought that the frozen ground and slippery surface would discount Stoke's class, but this was not so. Stoke's class was obvious throughout. They showed a greater skill in ball control, better positional play, and were more effective in covering, especially in defence. Stoke's attackers too reached their best form, and in the second half in particular, they showed excellent understanding in their approach work and were much more deadly in their finishing than the London team. Stanley Matthews, I'm just skimming, Stanley Matthews played a notable part in the victory, especially after the interval. He was the master of Turnbull and Forsyth. His footcraft, his body swerves and skillful centering contributed materially to the victory. Leading 1-0 at half-time, it would go on to be a 4-0 win for Stoke City. I'll send you that, Neil. I'll send you that. But yeah, just seeing the name Stanley Matthews, listeners, there's nothing particularly notable, particularly about the loss there. But I thought that's one of the great names of the game, and there is against Millwall. So just wanted to mention him. I hope you can indulge me these things, listeners. And there we are. Stoke City 4, Millwall 0, 1936. I think that's our lot, Neil. I think that we've done the rounds of the fixtures for March.
we have. I think we've only got one more month to go, haven't we?
One more month to go, and then we'll be into the long, lazy, hazy, crazy cricket season of summertime. Neil and I will be doing one or two shows over the summertime. I think we can probably drag ourselves away from the bat and the ball, and but yeah, April to come. So we'll look forward to that. We'll probably get that out towards the end of March. Big thank you to Neil Fissler for your time and your research, mate.
Thank you very much indeed. I hope everybody gets as much pleasure out of these as we do, just rambling on about nothing for an hour and 10 minutes.
I hope so. Don't forget the book, which is on victorpublishing.co.uk. It's called Millwall Who's Who. It's by Neil Fissler plus Dave Sullivan, Chris Bethel, I believe, Neil, and Jim Creasy, I believe, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah,
the fourth name attached to that wonderful book, 1999 plus PMP. Do check it out; it's well worth having. It's a classic. So that's all for now, listeners. Neil and I will be back during the course of March with our next history show, and almost certainly to review the progress of the Rowett train whenever it comes off the rails.
The Rowett Express, all aboard the Rowett Express to Reading.
It must come off the rails at some point. It's just a question of when. Till the next edition, listeners, thank you for listening, and Arrivederci Millwall. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Achtung Millwall. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a cheeky little review. Arrivederci Millwall. Till next time.
Who do you want to watch?